Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians and guests. And thank you, George, for inviting me to make this presentation in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and after the recent murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis and cries all around the country and all around the globe for justice and peace. When I began this year, 2020, the new year, I began with a greeting, 2020, a year of clearer vision. Little did I know then that we would be experiencing such chaos and uncertainty, as I'm sure none of you imagined either. And just recently, I received a poem from a student at Southwestern University, which helps me to understand perhaps where we are. And I'd like to share it with you as we open this talk. What if 2020 isn't canceled? What if 2020 is the year we've been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable, so painful, so scary, so raw, that it finally forces us to grow. A year that screams so loud, finally awakening us from our ignorant slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change, declare the change, work for change, become the change. A year we finally band together instead of pushing each other further apart. 2020 isn't canceled, but rather it is the most important year of them all. This was written by Leslie Dwight. Before telling a portion of my story this afternoon, let me say that this is a moment in time when we can create a new world, a new nation, a new city, a new state, and a new community. If we are willing to confront the evil monster, racism, that divides us. So let's think and talk for a moment about racism. Racism defined is racial oppression. And we know that racial oppression is painful to experience and challenging to discuss. Discussions are difficult even when people respect and understand each other. They are even harder when people use the same words to convey different ideas. So for purposes of this presentation, I invite you to join with me as we examine a definition of racism, specifically referring to individuals, cultural, institution, and systemic ways by which differential opportunities, outcomes, and consequences are created for different racial groups. The group historically or currently defined as white is being advantaged, and groups historically or currently defined as non-white, i.e. African, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, etc., are being disadvantaged. That idea aligns with those who define racism as prejudice plus power, a common phrase in the sociological field. The relationship and the behavior of these interdependent elements allow racism to recreate itself generation after generation, such that systems perpetuate racial inequity and they no longer need actors to explicitly promote racial differences and opportunities, outcomes, and consequences, and to maintain those differences. We define individual racism as beliefs, attitudes, and actions of individuals that support or perpetuate racism. Individual racism can be deliberate, or the individual may act to perpetuate and support racism without knowing that he or she is doing so. Some examples: telling a racist joke, or using a racial epithet, or believing in the inherent superiority of whites over other groups, avoiding people of color whom you do not know when some whites walking down the street cross to the other side to avoid a group of Latinos, young people, for example, or locking the door of your automobile when you see African Americans gathering in a parking lot. Accepting things just as they are, and this is a form of collusion, i.e., not questioning the actions or policies or behaviors, simply accepting them. I have begun to write my autobiography, and it's a work in progress. The working title is My Life as a Black Man, colon, a story of hope. And it is excerpts from that writing that I'd like to share with you this afternoon. I was born in 1948 and grew up in Macon, Georgia. Early on, we lived in Tyndall Heights, the public housing projects for colored people in Macon. After my parents divorced, my sister and I, with my mother, moved in with her parents on a dirt street there in Macon. On that dirt street lived my mother's grandparents, my great grandparents, two of her mother's sisters, and a brother, along with their families. On the south of us were apartments that were built for military families, white military families. And behind us on the north were whites. On the west of us were whites. I guess you could say we lived in a racially mixed neighborhood. However, that was the extent of our mixing. I was fully aware of the differences between Black and white folks. My mother cleaned houses and washed clothes for some of those white people. In one of the military families, the mother was a nurse with twins, a boy named Philip and a girl, Phyllis. I grew up getting Philip's hand-me-down clothes, but I could not play with Philip, and my sister could not play with Phyllis. There was an open field across that dirt street uh, beside the military apartments where the white boys would gather and play baseball. But I couldn't go there. I couldn't go and play baseball with them. I could only watch from across that dirt street. At age 14, my first job was working downtown as a stock boy in the Burns Boot Shop, a ladies' shoe store. I could buy my lunch from the window at the New Way hot dog stand, but I couldn't go inside to eat. Or I could buy my lunch from the to-go area at the FW Woolworths counter, but I could not eat at that lunch counter. At age 16, I went with my grandmother to get my driver's license. And I failed the driving test, although I had taken driving lessons and passed those lessons. And after failing that test, my grandmother told me that the mistake I made was not sirring the officer who was giving the test. She said to me, when you go back the next time, make sure that you sir him to death. Say, yes, sir. No, sir. That's right, sir. And I did it, and I passed the test. I grew up in racial segregation. There was a colored section of the local newspaper. There were colored and white only water fountains. There was a colored swimming pool. There were black churches and black schools. I would say that my life has been spent living in two worlds, one black and one white. April 14, 1968, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that was a pivotal day in my life. It was the day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. I was a junior at Duquesne University, and Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King's murder sent shockwaves all across America. The Nobel Peace Prize winner was dead from a gunshot. The preacher and strong advocate of nonviolence was dead from a violent act. Students, faculty, and administrators at Duquesne were all in shock. And like other cities in America, Pittsburgh caught fire. The city was burning. The Hill District, the central city area for African Americans in Pittsburgh, less than 2 miles from the Duquesne University campus, was on fire. Downtown Pittsburgh was on fire. It struck me that what was needed was a point of some understanding. And so I became a bridge builder. The university was in the early stages of a reconstruction project on campus, and there were calls for more minority workers on that project. Students organized and demanded Black study courses and hiring Black faculty and staff. And at the time, I was serving as an elected representative to the Student Congress, our student government. And because of these demonstrations and actions all across the city, the protests on campus, and my perceived need for conversations about race, I proposed and gained support to conduct a weekend, which we call a Black-White workshop. The workshop presentations and discussions covered a range of issues from employment to housing to education to religion. The participants included students, faculty, university administrators, community members, and community leaders. For me, this was a major accomplishment and a significant event in the life of the university. I was becoming that bridge builder, a connector across racial lines. Fast forwarding to 2000 and my coming to Georgetown, Tom Owens, who is a former president of this club, who joined us in this meeting today because he wanted to hear this presentation, was one of the first persons that I met when moving to Georgetown. Tom and Jim Gross, who has now passed on, invited me to lunch with them at the UT Club in Austin. And we chatted and got to know each other. And then within a matter of months, Tom sponsored me to become a member of the Rotary Club of Georgetown. At that time, I was the only African American member of the club. It has been my honor to serve our club in various leadership roles, with the greatest honor being to serve as president during the centennial anniversary of Rotary International. It was while serving as club president in 2004, 2005, that I had the opportunity of attending the international conference in Chicago, Illinois. It was there that I witnessed the enormous influence of Rotary International, this organization for world peace and brotherhood. While in Georgetown, I've begun several initiatives. One of those is Courageous Conversations. In August of 2014, after the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, the Holy Spirit inspired me to gather about 20 faith and community leaders to raise the question, is it possible to engage in respectful civil dialogue about the difficult issue of race? Because we knew that what happened in Ferguson could happen anywhere in the nation, even in Georgetown, Texas. And I was being guided, motivated to see if there are ways that we could prevent such violence from occurring here in Georgetown. We were discouraged and often criticized that we were stirring up unnecessary racial tension by creating courageous conversations. However, we persisted, and we gained support from the Georgetown Public Library, which allowed us to host a series of conversations in 2016, 15, 16, begun with a book study of Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. Bryan Stevenson looked at the incarceration of individuals over a period of time, many who were innocent, it was discovered, but they had not been adequately represented by legal counsel. So we undertook these courageous conversations and focused on the areas of our city which are called the cornerstones of a community of excellence: education, public safety, economic development, and healthcare. We also added issues about transportation and housing. This year, we have begun a focus on the theme, How Are the Children?, which comes from the Maasai African tribe. And we asked the second question, are all the children well? And our focus this year is on public education and how we can help prepare our children for their bright, positive futures. I often ask myself, why am I here in Georgetown? And what is my purpose? In mid-March, I visited with Dr. Dan Bonner, a former member of our club. Dan and I prayed, and I shared with Dan that I was intensely wrestling with this question of why am I here in Georgetown at this time? As we sat quietly, the Holy Spirit revealed to me that the children that I'm tutoring and reading with at Annie Pearl School, and the children that we are ministering with at the Quail Valley Apartments, they are a major part of the reason I'm here. I thought about the fact that many of those youngsters are not reading at grade level, and that their parents may only speak Spanish, and those parents depend upon their children to translate. I thought about the children at the Juvenile Justice Center, and I thought about all the children who have had 4 or more adverse childhood traumatic experiences, ACEs. And I thought, but for the grace of God, I could have been one of those children. It came to me very clearly that I'm here for such a time as this. Today, there are youngsters who live in the Quail Valley apartment area who cannot play on the Georgetown Soccer Association fields near their elementary school, Annie Pearl. And I thought about my own experience growing up in Macon on that dirt street and not being able to go across that street to play baseball with those white boys. I think about the young boy that I tutor at Annie Pearl School. He's a math whiz. He loves to play soccer, but he's not reading at grade level. In fact, he can't read the word problems to get to solve the mathematical calculations. In that school, there are no male role models of color. Yes, Georgetown is a place that needs desperately to deal with racism. And so on May 25th, we all witnessed the murder of George Floyd. Racism is the disease that is killing us as Americans. Racism killed George Floyd. I believe that George Floyd's murder was a kind of wake-up call to end this evil of racism. And so I want to issue a call to action to our Rotary Club. Even in the face of this chaotic and uncertain time, I'm still hopeful. Back in 1979, Rotary launched a global campaign to eradicate polio. That was 47 years ago. In 2020, I propose that the Rotary Club of Georgetown initiate a campaign against racism under Rotary International's Promoting Peace umbrella. Our club could become a model or join with other clubs in this effort. I am more than willing to coordinate with other members of our club to develop a plan to present to the club's board of directors and eventually to the club for consideration and possible approval. I thank you for this opportunity to share a portion of my life story with you today. But let us together listen to this song called One Voice.